And I figure we might as well start, because, hey, we're, a minute early. Who's going to give us trouble for that? So, I am Keith Baker. I'm best known as the creator of Eberron. I've also made a card game called Gloom that some people may have encountered, and if you haven't, you should check it out. And randomly, I've also started out professionally in the computer game industry and have worked on a lot of games that have mostly gotten canceled. So, which is one reason I quit and went into role-playing full-time. So, just again, polling, since we got new people in, who is here because they're interested in Eberron? All right. Who is here because they're interested in Gloom? Okay. And who is here because they're interested in hearing about what I'm doing next? Okay. Well, we'll start with the Eberron and work our way towards, and I'll just make sure I save some time for the next stuff towards the end. So, skimming down a couple things, I think. Let's just start with the question of what is happening with Eberron and D&D next. And, where is it going from here? And the answer to that is I cannot actually tell you right now. What I can say is that there is going to be some form of support. They're putting Warforged into the next playtest packet. The question sort of is, to what degree are they supporting any setting? And I feel that what they are doing is designing it to be very modular. They will likely do an Eberron module, and I would think if they do, they will get me working on that. But I do not think that they are going to be doing the same kind of print support we've had in the past. It is my hope, if that is the case, that they might be interested in licensing the setting so that I might be able to write some more stuff on my own or something like that. But essentially, and that's something we've had some discussions about. It's a possibility, but they've got all sorts of, they need to come to a concrete decision, and they haven't quite done it yet. So the short answer is I think there will be something done with Eberron, but I can't at this point tell you how much or who will be doing it. Though again, I expect I would be involved in some way. So there is that. Someone asked me the other day, can I see the one-page description? For those who don't know about it, how many people here are familiar with how Eberron happened, the fantasy setting search? So the thing about Eberron was that basically in 2000, I want to say 3, but it could have been 2, Wizards of the Coast held this fantasy setting search where they basically said, we've got our new system, we want to come up with a new world for it. If you've got a good idea for a world, send us a one-page description of your world. And I think they were really thinking it was just going to be like 500 entries or something like that, and they got 12,000. And at the time, I had just actually quit my computer game job because the most recent of the games I had put 3 years into, I realized was going to get canceled, and I was like, enough of that. So I decided to go into the exciting, lucrative world of freelance role-playing design, and that is sarcasm for people who might have stars in their eyes about such things. And fortunately for me, at that time, Wizards came along and did this thing. And so, that worked out for me. Basically, they got 12,000 entries. They narrowed those down to 11 and said, well, now give us 10 pages. And then they narrowed those down to 3 and said, well, now give us 100 pages. And then took Eberron. And as I said, someone had asked me, well, can I see the one-pager? And the fact of the matter is you can't, because, everything does belong to Wizards. If they decide to release it sometime, great. I can certainly tell you that the Eberron you play today is very different from that one-pager, because Eberron is not a campaign that I was, playing. It's not Ed Greenwood. This was his home campaign that, I did for a decade. It was something I came up with for the fantasy setting search. It was an idea that I liked. I've been working on a lot of pulp and noir stuff. It's always been a genre I enjoyed. I said, well, what if you put that, into D&D? And the basic concept of magic as it exists in Dungeons and Dragons is a force that is logical, it is repeatable, it is something one wizard can teach a spell to another. To me, that's always been a thing where if that exists, why can you have thousands of years go by and, magic is only wielded by wizards in towers? It should be something that affects society. And so to me, part of the thing was saying, how has it, how would a culture in which arcane magic was their tool actually change things? And one of the things I will say is actually, basically, once they took my 100-pager and said, this is the one we want to go with, I flew into Wizards, and we spent a couple weeks basically with me and James Wyatt and Bill Slavisek and Chris Perkins in a room sort of saying, okay, well, what are we actually using from this 100-pager? What are we changing? How do we make it better? And it was a fantastic, more heads are always better than one. And there are a number of things that, are quite different. I'll throw out, random element is the fact that the Talenta Halflings were always down as a sort of nomadic culture. It was actually, in my mind, because James Wyatt's son was in a big dinosaur phase that we were like, well, what about dinosaurs? They could ride dinosaurs. And it's like, well, that's different. And again, Lost World fits very much with the sort of thing. So there's a number of elements like that that worked, from my 100-page setting. And I had a very specific point I was going to make about that has completely slipped my mind. So we're just going to move on. Unless there's any questions about any of that. Anyone have anything in particular they would like to know about that process?
What was your original vision for the Warforged?
Okay, so the Warforged, to me, and this is a point that when Eberron was being created, I created the story. I didn't create the mechanics. They didn't want me to create the mechanics. When you did your 100 pages, they were very specific about wanting a world Bible. Don't actually, say there's a new class. Don't make the stats for the new class. And the Warforged went through a lot of iterations. And the Warforged, to me, were very much about, and I remember my original point. They were very much about, basically, magic being used in all parts of society, such as war. How is war different? And the original point I was going to make is actually in my original thing, I would not have had Galifar have a history of 1,000 years. Because it's slightly too big a sweep of time for me. There's not quite, I would have liked a little more focus on the evolution of magic, on how a particular, the development of elemental binding actually affected the next couple hundred years. We do get some of that in the last war, where you do start saying, okay, it was only 30 years ago that they invented the Warforged. It was only this long ago that they invented air travel, And so the Warforged were, again, part of the way of saying, let's look at something that is an innovation in the current military technology. Also, I'll say I'm a huge Philip K. Dick fan. I really like questions of identity. To me, I really liked the idea of the Warforged as you are a weapon created for a war that is now over. What do you do? No one, your purpose is no longer there. So what's that? How does that leave you? And that, to me, was something I really liked about the Warforged, is all the questions that gets raised about you are having to essentially define yourself and your place in the world. Now, that comes up to the question about how do you keep changes from spiraling? And one of the points to me is that Eberron wasn't really about changes. Eberron was, to a greater degree, about how do we take what is already there and integrate it. Like, one of the points I would just make is the message stones that House Civis uses. The whole point to those is it's essentially built on the idea of the spell Whispering Wind, which delivers a message from one point to another specific point. And that's my thing of saying, well, once we have that, we have a telegraph. Now we just have to be able to use it whenever we want instead of once per day. And that's the point of Dragonmark focus items, was saying, so yeah, this is just a spell that exists. So I was looking at, for example, one of the things that got dropped was essentially movie theaters. And the idea of a movie theater was that what you would have is a big crystal ball, and that they would just tune it to a stage where a particular performance is going on. And so rather than having television where the thing is beamed out to you, it's no, you just have a crystal ball that is focused on the studio. And it's that whole premise of essentially saying, look at a thing that is in D&D and say, how would that affect the world? One other example is to say trolls. Well, trolls regenerate. You can cut a troll's arm off and it grows back. So my immediate question is, why aren't we eating them? And, you can easily come up with answers like, well, because they'll grow back in your stomach or, things like that. But nonetheless, that's what I did with Droam, is you take Droam as a nation of monsters. A lot of them are carnivorous. You have to actually say, how would you support a large nation of carnivorous entities? And the premise there is to say, well, the Daughters of Sorkel have secret herbs and spices that essentially make troll edible. And so they have big troll farms that they just feed everybody troll sausage. Soylent Troll is people. And it's things like that of saying, Droam is a perfect example of where Corvair, their tool is arcane magic. With Droam, their tool is monsters. And so the question is again saying, if that's what you have to build a civilization on, what will you do to solve your problems? The idea of saying that, well, we can feed everybody using troll sausage. We essentially have cryogenics because we have Medusas. All I need to do is petrify you, and I'll thaw you out when we have a way to fix your problem or, do whatever. And to me, it's always been about that. How do we take the tools that exist and do new things with them rather than sort of change everything? I will say that a point on changes also does come to the question of alignment, which came up. A lot of people will say, well, you've got this evil king who's trying to stop war, and you've got this good queen who's trying to start war. How's that even work? The point to me is, in a world in which detect alignment exists, when detect evil exists, what that tells me is that evil people are not a threat to society, or we would have had an inquisition and wiped them out, and your baby would be checked, regularly when you went into the doctor. We would also check, are you evil? So you basically either have to say, nobody trusts paladins, or you say, oh yeah, we know that guy's evil, so what? He's a tax collector. That's his job. And so to me, basically, personal alignment tells you how you will do things in your immediate environment. It does not tell you about what your greater goals are or things like that. So the point is, where you have the evil king who wants to stop war, there is no question that in the big picture, not having a war is a good thing. People will not die, all of these things. The point about the evil king is that he will assassinate people, he will torture people, he will throw his own children into prison if it will stop that war. Whereas the good queen who wants war truly believes that war is going to make things better and that she would be the best queen ever, but she would never torture someone. I mean, that would be horrible. And that, again, knowing that this person is evil, what it really tells you is he's ruthless, he has no remorse, he is able to take actions, without empathy, whereas the good person, they are going to care more about the direct impact, even if the greater impact is going to be terrible for people. And to me, it comes back to Yoda in Empire Strikes Back, looking at Luke and saying, there's much darkness in him, much anger. And to me, I look at that and say, he just detected him as evil. And that doesn't change the fact that he may save the universe. But he's kind of got a dark thing going on about how he does it. And so, again, the idea is that if I was a paladin and I did an evil check on the room here and discovered that, a quarter of you were evil, I would go, that's really depressing. I'm going to try and, straighten you up. But I wouldn't be like, oh my God, you must die. Because, as I said, otherwise I don't see how you can have a logical society, or also how you can tell a noir story if all I need to do is say, detect evil, oh, you're evil, you're the bad guy. I like the idea that, no, the good guy could be the bad guy. He's going to do it in a really nice way, but that doesn't change the fact that his actions are terrible. So again, coming back to the point of saying a repo man, to be good at what he does, and it might be a job society needs, probably is going to be evil because he has to be able to take stuff from people with no remorse. And again, it's just a different way of looking at things. So moving on down the road to talk about the Dalkir. People came up. First off, I will say check out my website, which is on the other side of this card, keith-baker.com. I actually have just written a whole bunch of stuff about the Dalkir, and I also have a huge thing on alignment back there, if you look back a ways. But basically, so the first question was about the war. One of the things I will say is that Eberron has a lot of big villains. You have the Lords of Dust, you have the Dreaming Dark, you have the Dalkir. You know, all of these are essentially people who, if they succeed at what they're doing, are going to destroy life as we know it in some way. One of the things is I tend to say, if you're doing a campaign, pick your villain. You know, you don't have to squeeze all of these in. It could be the Lords of Dust simply have nothing going on for the next century. They work in a very big picture, you know. With that said, to me, yes, all of these are apocalyptic villains, and yet the apocalypse they would bring in is completely different. So the Lords of Dust, if overlords rise, they are essentially Cthulhu. If they get out, they are going to just throw the whole area around them into terror and chaos and, you know, completely screw up society as we know it. With the Dreaming Dark, they want to impose order. You know, they will do it in some weird way. We don't know which path they will take to do it, but they want to actually essentially create a stagnant, stable society under their rule. The Dalkir, to me, what makes them different from either of those, the whole idea of the Dalkir is that we don't understand them, that they are the embodiments of madness, essentially. And that means that, you know, they are the most alien of any of these. That the Dreaming Dark, we get why they do what they do. They are trying to preserve their own species. They are trying to establish order. The Lords of Dust want to be free, and they are embodiments of ideas. They are embodiments of hate, of, you know, the fury of war, of betrayal, and those are our concepts. And the point to me about the Dalkir is we just don't understand anything about why they are doing what they're doing. Do they want to destroy the world? Do they think that they're improving it? Is it essentially a sculptor and we're just a block of clay and they're just making a piece of art? And that essentially what we know is they will mess us up. You know, they will take us and they will turn aberrations out of our children, and they will drive you crazy, and they will, you know, plant strange things, but we don't know why. And we don't know how do all their actions make sense connected. And this is part of the point of the Cults of the Dragon Below. The Cults of the Dragon Below are in no way monolithic. They all have different ideas about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And they can appear anywhere. You know, an example I gave on my website was to say, someone's like, well, why would you ever join a Cult of the Dragon Below? And what I said was, well, imagine that you woke up tomorrow and suddenly realized that you are the reincarnation of King Arthur, and that you actually have the ability to see the souls of the Knights of the Round Table and the people around you, and they will recognize you when you see them, and you know that you've been brought back because this is the time of the nation's greatest need, and you have got to fight the horrible dream monsters that are attacking people to save them, and this is what you were born for. Hey, congratulations, you're in the Cults of the Dragon Below. You know, the point is, madness is not something that has a logical thing to anyone outside of it. It is something that makes perfect sense to the people who are doing it. And my point on that King Arthur example, and we'll say Conan the Conqueror, perhaps, is that they may even be, you know, that could be a general, a Brailish general, who is a great leader of people. You know, they don't have to be crazy homeless people. You know, it just happens that aside from the fact that he thinks he's reincarnated Conan the Conqueror, he's an amazing leader and soldier and whatever, and he may even, in fact, be organizing a group to save us from the Dreaming Dark, who are invading our dreams. Because, among other things, if some guy says, monsters are invading our dreams and manipulating us, you're not going to think he's crazy? And which is also a trick I really like to play with people, is to do just that. Have the Cult of the Dragon Below appear that is saying, oh yeah, we're here to save you from crazy monsters in your dreams that are going to be, that are you know, controlling people and reprogramming them and things like that, and we have to kill them. And we even have our friendly mind flayer who actually helps steel our minds against them. And players who know Eberron and are like, that sounds like the Dreaming Dark. Well, now they have to wonder, are you in fact using the Dreaming Dark here, or are they just crazy people who are just killing people because, I don't know, do you want to let that mind flayer steal your mind against the dreamers? But so it comes back to the Dalkir War, the Zoriat incursion. And the key point to me is that was not a war like we tend to think of it, in my mind. Part of the whole point of Eberron is you can take it anywhere you want. My vision is just a place to start. But to me, it was something that lasted centuries. And part of the idea is that the Dalkir, most of the time, are not going to just... I'm not a general who stands in front of an army that is laid out like an army and is going to engage your army directly. It's instead, I am going to, again, cause a whole legion of your soldiers to think that they are King Arthur and are going to fight the rest of you because they believe that the rest of you have been contaminated by evil. I may very well take a legion of your soldiers and turn them into Dolgons or Dolgrim, because that's fun too, and just throw them at you and see what you do with them. But the point is, I'm not going to do that because I want to seize your city and occupy your territory and enforce my way of life on you. I'm just going to throw them at you. And apparently because I want to see the suffering you endure when you realize that these are your children who I've turned into monsters. That, again, the point of the Dalkir is their goals are not going to be the concrete goals of a ordered, logical society. They can do things. One of the other examples I said is, you want to do a Dalkir, and then the next day you develop a weird dragon mark-like design shaped like an eye on your skin. And it starts to grow, and you develop telepathic powers that actually warn you of danger. This seems kind of cool. Now, at the same time, you also hear about one other guy who this happened to and who eventually went crazy and killed his family. And part of the point is to say, why is this here? What is it going to do? Should you trust it? That's exactly the point of the kind of thing a Dalkir might do, because who knows? That the Dalkir to me are the ones that you should not be able to understand why they are doing what they are doing. A lot of people say, well, why haven't they made a more organized effort? Why don't they join forces to get out? And that's the point. Why don't they? We don't know. Do they even care that they're imprisoned? And that is the concrete difference between them and the Lords of Dust, is maybe they're perfectly happy being imprisoned. Maybe that's what they want. That they are the most mysterious. The secondary question was, how do they create the Dalkir Half-Bloods? Now, my point there is, I didn't create the Dalkir Half-Bloods. So I do not have this is what I was thinking. One of the things to me is, I totally say, the Dalkir could do anything. You could make up, like I said, he wakes up tomorrow and thinks he's Karn the Conqueror. He wakes up tomorrow with a weird dragon mark design. He wakes up tomorrow with tentacles growing out of his back. That, again, part of it is that we don't know the degree of power that they have. We know the stats that they're given in the monster manual, but, for example, this is one of the things I say on the website, Belashira is the Lord of Eyes. Some people say that he can see through anybody's eyes. Can he? I don't know. If he could, and he was like the Dreaming Dark, he'd use that in some concrete way. Because we don't know why he does what he does. Maybe he does. Maybe he can just switch your vision around. Maybe he can take your eyes and make them see what he sees. He just hasn't, because he doesn't feel like it. And so, part of the point of the Dalkir is they could have as much power as you want, because we don't know why they don't use it. To me, I definitely look at the Dalkir Half-Blood, and what I immediately think is Wilbur Whately from the Dunwich Horror. And part of the point I say to that is, again, you've been warped in this way. Why? What does it mean? Why did they do that? Are you the first of an army of human Dolgons, essentially? Or was it just a wacky one-time experiment? Or was it a moment of true love? We don't know. Similarly, one of the ideas that got tossed around on the website is the idea, what if the Dalkir created the dragon marks? What if they popped into our reality, saw that there was this prophecy thing that the dragons and the fiends were so interested in, and said, oh, we can take that and put that on living creatures, because we think that's interesting. Essentially, some people have said, well, what would be the human version of a Dolgont? And what I'm saying is, well, for all you know, it's people with dragon marks. You know, I mean, there is no reason to have a clear logic to their behavior. And to me, as a Dalkir half-blood, that would be one of the things I'd personally be really riffing on, is do you really know why you are the way you are? Do you really know if the people that created you are evil or not? You know, again, maybe they oppose the Dreaming Dark. There's then the question of magic and technology, how you balance these things. One of the things is that with Eberron, it was not my goal to balance magic and technology. You know, one of the things we said from the start is we're not going to have guns. You know, essentially, we're going to say that this is a setting from, you know, if in the Renaissance we had magic instead of technology, where would we be 500 years later? To me, when you blend the two, like Shadowrun, Arcanum, things like that, a lot of what makes that interesting for me is the friction that creates. Is the how are these things different? How do they work together? What conflicts that happens there? And I love Shadowrun. But part of the point was to say, but that's not the story that Eberron is about. Eberron is about saying the tools we have in our possession are magical tools. How do we solve the same problems people solve using technology, using those tools? So again, communication. Oh, great, we've got Whispering Wind. We've got, clairvoyance. Again, medicine, warfare. You know, what are the tools that we work in there? And I already touched on that a little with the idea of you want a magic television. Don't just say, it's a television, but it's magic. Say, crystal balls can do that for us. It's just that it reads out instead of having the content beamed in. And that's just a general thing that I mentioned in the world building panel as well. To me, it's all about look at the tools that you have and say, how would they impact the world? One of my biggest problems with Eberron is I would really like to have tighter restraints on Raised Dead as a thing that exists in the world. Because to me, Eberron is not a world where it feels like Raised Dead is a service people have every day. We have thrown in the Keeper's Fang specifically as this is a way you can concretely kill someone that they can't be brought back. I mean, there are ways to do things, but you always run into the question of, why didn't King Jarrett get brought back when they killed him? You know, and you can always say he didn't want to come back because you can't bring back someone who doesn't want to. But I have to say, 4th edition, one of the things I liked in the playtest that they took out was that they said, oh, Raised Dead only works for certain people. You know, Raised Dead is something where you only come back if you have an unfulfilled destiny. And you can try it, but most of the time it just doesn't work. And I liked that as that explains why this is essentially a tool for player characters, not a tool for the random rich guy down the street. Because to me, as I said, that's a thing that ought to have huge societal impact that I don't feel we've done. I also threw in things in City of Stormreach, like saying that there's always risks that you bring the wrong thing back, or that inevitables are going to show up or stuff, and that House Jurasco, essentially before they will ever do a resurrection, will basically do an augury to say, should we do this resurrection? And if it comes back negative, be like, no, we're not touching that. Last time that happened, 3 Maroots smashed our whole, hospital. So like I say, to me, whether it's we've got edible trolls, we have, Whispering Wind, it's all about how should this thing have an impact. Let's see what time we're up to here. All right. Morning. So the question I believe that came up was, hey, before the morning was just gray and weird and misty, but then there's this kind of map of it. How does that affect everything? The morning to me has always been there. One of the points of the design of Eberron was to say, you make of it what you will. This is a starting point, but it is your world too. You should feel free to change it, and that we have concrete points within the world, the Morning, Kyber, and Zendrik, that are all very, very open to development. You want to add in bee people, because you've just bought the latest book that has the Abil, and you say, bee people, I want bee people in Eberron. Well, right off the top of my head, I can say, oh, there was a city in Syria that was transformed by the morning into a city of bee people, and now they are finally venturing out past the Mornland. Or I can say, you venture into Zendrecht and find the lost city of bee people that no one has ever encountered before. Or I could say, the Dalkir just created a bunch of bee people. That you don't... This is one of the biggest things people don't get about Eberron, who don't get it, is that they hear the phrase, if it's in D&D, it has a place in Eberron, and think that means everything is there, and it's this ridiculous kitchen sink setting that just has everything crammed in. And the point to me is, it's not that everything's there. It's that there's a place for everything if you want it to be there. And so the Mornland was always in there initially as one of the things is, if we have a society that has been a stable and prosperous society for 1,000 years, why do we have monsters? Because trolls eating your peasants usually kind of interferes with your prosperous society. How do you let centuries go back and not have dealt with that? The Morning was in part a way to say, we are going to drop the biggest, scariest dungeon around right in the middle of your prosperous, happy civilization. And so now any number of nasty things can crawl out. Now transportation's been screwed up. So one of the points to me about the Mornland is nothing about it should be set in stone. So yes, we have a map which essentially tells you, well, someone made this map and there was a glass plateau here when they got there. If your players go there and there's no glass plateau and they say, but it was on the map, say, maybe it was. Maybe the guy ended up somewhere else. Maybe it's gone now. Maybe it, again, the Morning is a place where you can't rely on anything. Certainly to me, I think there is value to a map to say this is where Metrol was, this is where Making was. These are the places that were the great cities before the Morning happened, because that gives you a lot of room to say, oh, we're sending you to try and salvage something. Oh, House Kneath had their biggest forge hold at Making. Well, then that should have a lot of interesting stuff there. But especially in the Mornland, to me, whenever I do a Mornland adventure, I always make something new up. I'm always like, what is the weird, freaky thing that you find here? So one of the things is even the idea that corpses don't decompose in the Mornland. To me, that's not a blanket rule. That's just a thing that certainly happens in a bunch of places in the Mornland. But, if I decide that here, if you die, your body completely melts away into wax, then that's what happens, because the Mornland is unpredictable. Now, the other question that followed on that was, okay, so what caused the Morning? You made the world. I think that that question did take into account the fact that, well, I'm not going to tell you because I don't know. The whole point of the Morning is that the fact that it exists is much more important than than what actually happened. It is basically the event that brought the war to an end, and it brought the war to an end because we don't know what happened. Everyone is essentially terrified to keep fighting because we don't know. Is that a weapon somebody has, and if so, they're just recharging it for a second shot? If so, we don't want to fight them. Is it that it happened because we were throwing too much war magic around? And just it built up to a critical point. Syria was the location that was the sort of most beat upon. Is that just what happens if you fight a magical war for too long? Was it the release of an overlord? The whole point is saying that once that answer is known, then we know, could it happen again? And once we know that, if it is a weapon, then whoever has that weapon is going to essentially try and rule the world. If it's not a weapon, but it would never happen again, well, then why not get back to fighting? The point is the last war did not end with anyone's problems being resolved. It's in this Cold War state because we're too scared to continue. And so one question, when you choose an answer, is think about what the impact of that answer will be, because in my mind, most of the time it's going to mean the war starts again. At least Aurora will head there. Now, what do I think it is? So the point is, when I made it, I didn't have an answer in mind. It wasn't about the answer. A lot of things in Eberron are like that the way I like to design is say it could be X, Y, or Z, because, you may want to take it somewhere else, and furthermore, you have a player who reads the book. Well, the point is I can play in your Eberron campaign and I don't know what caused the morning. And I like that. So again, I want it to be about inspiration, not just the end of days. So taking the morning, I can certainly say off the top of my head, oh, it was the release of an overlord. And that's just what he does when he pops out, and now he's building up his strength, and when he finally rises up, he could just do that anywhere he goes. Or you could say it was House Kneath building some kind of crazy weapon that malfunctioned, and it's in making. If you could get in there and figure out how to use it, it could be found. Or you could say that it's, I actually say in The Fading Dream, is one of my novels, puts forth a theory of this is what caused the morning, and it's what the Eladrin think caused the morning, and it's up to you to decide, are they right? Because in part, there is no concrete way at the end to say right or wrong, but it's perfectly valid, the morning was caused because, this one person stabbed the wrong person, and there was a big fairy tale chain of events that makes sense if you're an Eladrin. And any number of things like that. And the real question to me is not what the answer should be as much as why do you want it to be that answer. And this is something I mentioned in the story, the world building thing, which I'll say again, is anything you add, anything you make up, what is the story that is better because you have added that in? If I want it to be a story about it was a bomb, and that bomb is in making, and now it is all about who's going to get it first. And, this huge Raiders of the Lost Ark, we're all racing around to piece together the thing we need to make the new morning bomb. That's what it's going to be. If I want it to be about, it was the release of an overlord, because it's now all going to be about figuring out who that is, what their weakness is, all of this, that's what it's going to be. It's the adventure that I would want to figure out to determine that answer. I'm just going to pause for a moment and see again, are there any specific questions from any of that people would like before I go on?
Well, continuing with the topic of the Mornlands, who do you think is the most likely candidate to be the Lord of Blades?
So the Lord of Blades is another good example. One of the interesting things was that in the original 3.5 source book, there is a lot of stuff that got cut out. And one of the things is that there's a section in it where you have recurring villains, and you have stats for Hallis Martaine and Demise. And in the original version, I actually had stats for the Lord of Blades. And the idea there, this also comes back to the question that was asked about high-level campaigns. And recurring villains are a big part of that, in that, to me, the point is people will say, wow, the biggest, toughest wizard in the setting is a 16th level wizard. My character's going to be more than that later. And I'm like, yeah, and by the time your character is 16th level, she won't be a 16th level wizard. That Dr. Doom doesn't suddenly become irrelevant because the Fantastic Four went on a couple of adventures and gained some levels. He is also gaining levels. And that the major villains in your campaign, people like the Lord of Blades, people like Arandis Val, should also be becoming more powerful as things go. Now, the point is, there should be reasons for them to become more powerful, because if they could just become more powerful with the passage of time, Arandis Val would be 2,000 levels. She would have all the levels. So instead, I would want to tie that to the things she is doing. Well, she was trying to get the Cavalryng Codex, and you managed to stop her from setting off the necrotic resonator that would have turned everyone in Sharon into a zombie. But the fact of the matter was, that was just a side effect of her interest in getting the Cavalryng Codex. And what do you know? She's up a level now, because she did do that. So when you turn it up again, she'll be tougher. People should feel that the Lord of Blades is getting stronger because he's doing things. He's not just sitting on his hands while your adventurers run around and have all the fun. So going back to the Lord of Blades to me is like the morning. There are a number of good answers you could have. You could say that he is not Warforged at all. He is actually Aaron DeCanneth in a Warforged suit, who is furious about how his creation was warped to war and is trying to save them all. You could say that it was, I think, Bastion, the original Warforged bodyguard of King Borinel, who has seen that his people should have something more than that. I will say that the version I have personally used in my campaign is to say that actually he's not one person. He is multiple people. And there are 3 or 4, it's the Dread Pirate Robbers, that essentially they're a team that got together and said, okay, we're going to do all this stuff, but we need a brand, so we're going to be the Lord of Blades. And so that way, again, one of the points is you kill one of them, it's not over. Well, there's another. And then also quickly tying back into ongoing high-level campaigns, one of the points I would say there is a big thing for me for high-level campaigns is, first off, you can get into villains like the Lords of Dust or things like that really work on a much larger level than a normal player, can deal with. But also, I look to high-level players as get them involved in bigger things. Don't just make it about, and now you're beating up a bigger monster. Tie them into one of the nations about, and now we think that Orala is actually researching a morning bomb and is going to set it off, and we need to actually do something on a larger scale. Start leading a movement or things like that. I'll say that a player came to me, and one of the things is talk to your players about what they want. So I had a campaign where I just started off, we arranged how do the players know each other, and I asked them sort of, again, what were their big interests. And he said, I would like to have, I think he was a paladin of the Emerald Claw. Not Emerald Claw, Blood of Vault. And he said, I would like to say that my father was part of the Order of the Ebon Skull and served faithfully to protect Karnath. When Caius turned against the Order, he was basically dishonored and ended up being killed treacherously by, another rival warlord. I was smuggled out of the country and raised by, essentially, the Emerald Claw. And that I believe that it's my duty to avenge my father by overthrowing Caius. And that I see my general arc as essentially, initially I'm going to be building support. That's why I'm interested in adventurers. I'm trying to get support to do this. My next arc would be overthrowing Caius. And then my next arc would be realizing that, Arandis has been using me all along, and now I actually need to try and stop Arandis, and that whole overthrowing Caius was kind of a stupid move. And that's a very self-aware player, but that's the point, is that he said to me he specifically wanted to be a tool of the evil person and do a bad thing that he has to fix. Most players are not going to have that concrete a story. And the point is, well, he's told me that's his goal. He hasn't told me how he's going to do it or if it is even possible to do it. He's just said that's the idea he'd like to follow. And my point is that gave me a very clear, overthrowing Caius is not a casual, low-level activity. And dealing with the fallout of, now you're king of Karnath and you've thrown Karnath into civil war. What the heck do you do? This is a bigger kind of problem than beating up the dragon in the dungeon. And then how do you eliminate Arandis, not only like beating her up personally, but her influence in the Blood of All? These are larger scope problems than just what can you beat up. I am going to pause here for a moment and switch over to, I know there's a lot of questions. Well, I'm going to actually start with, I'll do one more before I get into the new stuff, which is, say, the question of gods, are they real? This is, again, a subject that you will find a bunch of stuff about on my website. Again, to me, the question is, they're as real as you want them to be. You need to decide that as the game master. One of the things I always found very funny was someone asked me early on, if the gods don't actually directly act on Earth, why does anyone believe in them? And I said, do you live on the same planet I do? And that's essentially the point is, yes, if you came from the Forgotten Realms, that is a question you might ask. But if you grew up here, you're going to say, again, when the doubter says, well, why doesn't Arawa ever do anything? I'd say, that gentle rain that made the flowers bloom yesterday, that was her. That, again, what they say is that the sovereigns don't need to manifest because they are everywhere. Anytime someone draws a sword, Doldorn and the Mockery are there. Urging them to act in a certain way. Anytime a smith creates something, Onatar is with him. And it is up to you to decide, is that true? And if you think it is, you could throw in things, give people inspiration. Give them little things that maybe that is the sovereign helping them. If you fudge the dice, maybe that's because Dolora just took a hand. They are as real and influential as you want them to be. Now, they are certainly influential through the fact that clerics have powers. Things like that. So, the whole point to me is that Eberron was designed to say that your characters should be the heroes. That when the Tarask rises up to smash Sharn, there really is no one else out there who can solve the problem. Sure, Jayla is, a badass cleric, but she loses all that if she leaves the church, the Flamekeep. And meanwhile, our 20th level druid, well, he's a tree, and he can't really come and help out. And, the whole idea was to say, yeah, the sovereigns are there, and they will guide you. That this is a setting where when they need heroes, if they need heroes, because again, not every game has to be about heroes. That's the pulp end of things. The noir end, maybe there are no heroes. But it's a matter of that the gods should be more about their impact on people. And this comes back to, I don't think the way Forgotten Realms does it, for example, is wrong. That lets you tell stories like the Time of Troubles. It lets you tell stories like a war where the gods take sides. The idea of Eberron is it lets you tell something like the Inquisition, where you would think that, the god behind this would say, hey guys, you're doing that wrong. That again, it lets you have schisms, it lets you have heresies, because there is no final arbiter to say this is the right answer. And to me, I wanted it to be where questions of faith, where people's beliefs, and where you could say the Silver Flame really is an altruistic, trying to do the right thing society, church, and they can still do the wrong thing. And that's sort of where the gods are in Eberron, is saying they may be there, they may be guiding us, they may be helping us, but if so, it's all about our faith in seeing how you see that. And that again, the person who says, well, the gods never do anything, the follower of the sovereigns will say, they do everything. You just aren't looking. You don't understand how that thing that just happened was influenced by them. Now, I would like to switch over quickly to talk about new stuff. You asked about next fiction. And the issue is, I can't do more Eberron novels unless WotC decides to do more Eberron novels, and so far they have not decided to do more Eberron novels. Certainly with The Dreaming Dark, I did not expect it to end where it was. I was sort of viewing it as a television series, and this is the end of Season 1, and it sets up a lot of questions for Season 2, except for the part where we never have Season 2. So, now Kyle MacLachlan is raving at a mirror, and we don't know where Annie is, and it sucks. So I did get to wrap up a little bit of some of those questions in the Thorn series, but again, even there, I thought the Thorn series was going to go a little longer than it was. There's certainly a lot of stories. What happened to Liam Pierce? Well, I'd love to tell you, but I can't tell that story on my own, and I don't know what Wizards is going to do. In terms of non-Eberron fiction, it's certainly something I want to do. It's a matter of finding the time, and part of that is in looking at things like new settings. Well, I don't just want to do a new setting as a game. I would like to do a new setting and support it in fiction and things like that. And with that in mind, there are two things I've been working on you might have heard about. One is called Codex. Again, working title only for both of these. But and Codex is essentially a setting that is my next Eberron, if you will. Which is to say, Eberron is a world that is vast in scope, that addresses many different things, that fills many different types of stories. Codex is not Eberron with the names filed off. It's not like you have Peace-smithed instead of Warforged or something like that. It is a totally different world, but it is also a world that explores themes of how does magic affect society, what is the impact of war, of religion, of things like that. It just explores those questions in different ways. So it is not just more Eberron, in part because I hope there will be more Eberron, but it is a setting that I think will appeal to people who enjoy Eberron because it explores things in the same perspective. The problem there is I've been working on this for a while, and I sort of hit a point of saying, this is a vast project. This is a project that once we put it out, we would want to have ongoing support. We would want to have adventure paths. We would want to have online support. I would definitely need to be hiring other writers, and I know lots of good writers. I'd love to have work on it. But this is a big thing. My wife and I have started a company. We're doing things, but again, unlike Monty Cook, I haven't done it before. And it was just looking at it and saying, that's jumping in a little too much into the deep end until we've learned to swim. And so Codex is something that's very important to me, and I will be doing, but I'm not going to be doing it until I'm sure I can. So in the meantime, I'm working on a project called Phoenix. Yes?
Have you ever thought of putting on Kickstarter for it?
Yes, I have. But the point about Kickstarter is that you don't want to do a Kickstarter unless you know you can deliver on it. And that's sort of the point to me of Codex. I have no doubt that I could put out a source book for Codex, and I could put out a couple of initial adventures. But what I'm saying is with Codex, I don't want it to just be one source book. I want it, as I said, to provide ongoing support. So instead, Phoenix is a much smaller, narrower project that I would compare it to Dragonlance versus Eberron, which is to say that it is a world where there is a particular story that is driving what is going on right now. Whereas Eberron, it is about the last war. It is about the impact, the conflict between the houses and the nations, but you can do anything with it. And the same way with Codex. You could make it about exploration. You could make it about war if you went over here. You could make it about political intrigue. Phoenix is something where, yes, there is a particular story that is driving the world and that your characters will be a part of. And it is something where essentially when we produce it, it is going to be a box that gives you what you need to play. We might put out expansions. We sort of have a 3-arc sort of saga. But you'd be fine if we didn't. This would give you enough to make whatever adventures you wanted to make on your own because, again, the scope is narrower. And so the point is, again, that is something we will be doing. I'll get you in a moment. We will be doing a Kickstarter for later this year. And the whole point is it is something that is small enough and concise enough for us to say we are confident we can deliver on this, and that process will also help us when we look and say, and how is making Codex different? How, is this something we're prepared for? There was a question in the back.
I was wondering, are you going to be staying with the D20 platform, or are you going to go with another kind of game system?
Good question. So first off, with Codex, it is something that we want to actually support with different systems. We would be doing Pathfinder support. We would potentially also be doing, Fate support. We would be doing other support. One of the things there is also with Codex, I would very much want to encourage people, whatever systems we don't cover, please cover. That, again, we want people to use whatever does the game best for them. And basically, I see no reason to create a new system for Codex because there's nothing it needs that cannot be done as a modifier to one of these existing systems. For Phoenix, we are making a new system. It is actually a card-driven system. And part of the point of it is that Phoenix is a completely different sort of... It is, again, focused around a certain sort of story. The basic short form of Phoenix is to say that this is a world where you have a stable empire that has, risen to the height of its power, has been very prosperous, and suddenly things are falling apart. And a host of supernatural threats are just striking all around the empire that it's unclear at this point how these things are related, or if they are. And essentially, you are the elite forces of the Empire who are being dropped into the worst places to try and deal with them. And the fact of the matter is that probably you're in over your head and you will probably die. But you are a phoenix, which means that when you die, you actually come back stronger than you started. And this is, in fact, the character advancement method of the game. You only come back, you only get stronger by dying. But you have to die to go up a level. In part because... well, I'll come back to it in a moment. However, the trick is you don't come back right away. So it's not like Paranoia where the point is, you die and you're back in 5 minutes. So among other things, part of the point here is that failure is an option, which is to say that we drop you in this place to stop this thing from spreading in this city, and you all die. Great, we've lost that city. Nice work. But you're back for the next mission. So, death has consequence. It affects the story in a number of ways that I'll get to, but it is not the end of the story. Except, yes?
Have you played Dark Souls or Demon Souls?
I have not, actually, but I'll have to check into it. Now, the twist I will throw here is that the trick, however, is that you only come back 8 times. So it is also the case that, actually early on, you die, you get tougher. But you are also closer to actually dying. It is also the case that essentially how your character evolves, the abilities you can gain and such, not only depend, on you dying, but on why did you die. Did you die because you were defending, sacrificing for someone else? Did you die because you weren't tough enough? Did you die because you just failed? And any given death, well, different people could look at it and say, well, that could be either of these things. And my question is, well, which is it to you? Because that is going to determine what you learn moving forward. And so, Oh, okay. So essentially, rather than saying death is either inconsequential, as in many MMOs, I lose a little experience, no big deal, or death is the end of the character's story I've been building for 3 years, the point with Phoenix is to say death is part of the story. It is not about avoiding death, because you are eventually going to die. We are stacking the odds pretty hard against you. It is about making sure that your death actually counts, that it means something, and that it is a death you want it to be. And so my point, just as a short form, is that is a system in a number of ways, like even just the way that we're handling combat resolution. It is a very different thing from D20. It is about how much are you willing to sacrifice to succeed, things like that. And so that was one where we looked at it and said, no, this is something where we want a system that is focused on this kind of story. And that, so for that purpose, could you adapt it to D20 and just say, you level when you die? Sure. But it's not going to be, to me it's all about different systems excel at different things. And one of my points with Codex is to say, I'll just get you in just a moment, is that you don't even have to use the same system every episode. You could consider that, well, this one we're doing D20, but this one we really think that we really like Lady Blackbird's way of handling, intrigue. So we're going to use that for this session. Here the point is that Phoenix is about a certain type of story, and we are designing a system that really we think tells that story.
No, I was going to ask, was the idea to give more to the game master to work with as opposed to just having just a set table on how to work?
Well, yes and no. I mean, actually, I'll go ahead and say one of the points in Phoenix is you have this resource that is essentially your will, your life force, that you can actually, short form, burn to turn a failure into a success. Essentially, imagine if you're rolling a d20 and I rolled a 6 and I needed a 15, I could burn as much willpower as it took to get that to a 15. But when my willpower runs out, I'm dead. And, essentially, it's things like that of saying this is a system where we do actually put a fair amount of choice in the player's hands, but that choice comes at a cost. Are you willing to do what you need to do here? And that, again, the point is, because when you run out, that's it. We have time for probably like a question, and then, as I said, I'll go hang outside for 15 minutes. So one question in the gray shirt. I'll get to you outside, sir.
What was your connection to 13th Age, and how do you feel about that system?
So 13th Age was something that, when it first started out, good question, I teamed up, basically Rob and Jonathan invited me in, as, it's going to be his dream team of game design. And I worked on it for a couple of months, but the thing was, what I was really looking to do was to create a new setting. Was to do something that I could feel this is a follow-up to Eberron that I can continue to do things with. And at the end of the day, that's not what 13th Age is about. 13th Age is about it's a system, not a setting. And even the icons are things that are intentionally somewhat genericized. So I was involved in sort of the discussions about the icons, coming up with that list, things like that. But it basically just reached a point after a couple months where I was just like, yeah, you don't really need me here. Systems are not what I take, again, Phoenix aside, where I'm working on a very specific system, it's not the thing that drives me the most. And it was just something, it's, again, completely amicable. I really admire both Rob and Jonathan. It was just something where they didn't need me as part of that team. I like 13th Age a lot. I like a lot of the things that it does. And yeah, like I said, every system does something different. And I actually have a post I just put up on my website, keith-baker.com, that was specifically about, hey, what if I wanted to use 13th Age for Eberron? So if you haven't checked that out, check that out. With that, we should wrap things up here. Like I said, I'll be outside for 15 minutes. So thanks.